So how do our healthcare systems decide which new, super expensive treatments to actually fund? It often boils down to a really, really tough question. How do you put a price on health? It sounds kind of impossible, right? But it's a calculation health economists have to wrestle with every single day. Today, we're going to take a look at a new method called OUF that's trying to make this whole process better, especially for people with rare diseases. So let's dive in.
First, we'll get into the fundamental challenge of pricing health. Then, we'll meet this new tool, OPUF, and I'll walk you through how it works. After that, we're going to step back and take a critical look at its potential flaws before zooming out to understand the big dilemma that researchers are facing.
All right, let's get right to the heart of it. How in the world do you measure something as personal, as complex, as the quality of someone's life?
Just think about that for a second. Is it $1 million? Is it priceless? Well, to make fair decisions about what treatments to fund, economists really need a number. But how on earth do you even begin to find one? The standard unit they use is something called the QALY, which stands for Quality Adjusted Life Year. Basically, 1 QALY equals 1 year in perfect health. So a year lived with a condition that, say, cuts your quality of life in half, well, that would be worth half a QALY. It's a pretty neat concept, but the real difficulty is figuring out that quality part.
And this is where we hit a massive wall. See, to get reliable data, the traditional ways of doing this, methods like the time trade-off or standard gamble, they require huge groups of people. Hundreds, sometimes even thousands. That's just not going to happen when you're studying a rare disease that might only affect a few people. For them, the old way just doesn't work. We need a totally different approach.
And that brings us to OPUF. It's a new method designed specifically to get around this small sample size problem.
Now, OPUF stands for a bit of a mouthful, online elicitation of personal utility functions. But what it really is a smart, adaptive online tool. It's designed to figure out what really matters to patients, even with a tiny group of them, which is exactly why it could be a complete game changer for rare diseases.
So, how does it actually do it? Well, OPUF's approach is fundamentally different from the classic methods. It's pretty clever.
See, instead of asking someone to think about their entire complex health situation all at once, OPUF breaks it down into its individual parts, things like pain, mobility, and anxiety. It figures out the value of each piece on its own, and then, kind of like building with Legos, it just adds them all together to get a final score.
The whole process is really structured. First, you rank which aspect of health is most important to you personally. Is it being free from pain, or is it being able to walk around? Then you give that number one dimension a value of 100, and you score all the others against it. And finally, you rate the severity of, say, a moderate problem versus a severe one, and that rating gets applied across the board. It's a very systematic way of building a personal map of what health means to you.
But here's the big question. Is a person's health really just the sum of its parts? This is where some serious questions about the OPUF method start to pop up, because the answer could have huge, real-world consequences.
And this slide really gets to the heart of the debate. On one side, you've got OPUF's compositional method. It works under the assumption that your feelings about pain are totally separate from your feelings about, say, being able to walk. But on the other side, you've got the traditional, holistic methods. They look at the whole picture at once, because in real life, these problems can stack up and make each other so much worse.
This quote from the researcher Afshin Ganjar absolutely nails it. Health problems don't exist in a vacuum, right? The misery of being in constant pain feels so much worse if you're also unable to move. By valuing them separately, OPUF might be missing this crucial interaction. And here's why that matters so much. If you underestimate the true burden of a disease, the treatments for it are going to seem less cost-effective, and that can lead to them not getting funded, leaving patients with no options.
And there are other potential weak spots too. For example, the method assumes that moderate pain feels just as bad as moderate anxiety, and I think we can all imagine situations where that's just not true. Plus, anytime you ask people to rate things on a 0 to 100 scale, it can get skewed by our very human tendency to avoid the extremes. You know, we don't like to pick 0 or 100. Each of these little issues is another way this sum-of-the-parts approach might not quite capture the full, messy reality of being sick.
So, all of this leads to a fundamental dilemma that researchers in this field are constantly up against. It's a trade-off between getting a perfect answer and, well, getting an answer at all.
You know, it's really important to remember that OPUF isn't the only tool in the toolbox. As this chart shows, it's just one of at least 8 possible ways you could combine different valuation techniques. Researchers could use a simpler method or a much more complex, precise one.
The version of OPUF we're talking about is a very specific choice. It's a hybrid that's trying to balance a lot of different needs.
And this right here, this is the fundamental trade-off at play. You've got this constant tension. Simpler methods, they're fast, they're easy, but they might not be very accurate. On the flip side, more complex methods, like something called the bisection technique, can give you incredibly solid data, but they're so demanding that they're just really hard to do on a large scale.
So at the end of the day, it's not really about finding one single best method. It's about understanding the compromises. OPUF is a tool built for a very specific compromise. Valuing health for rare diseases where getting large groups of people is impossible. It sacrifices some of that holistic accuracy for the sake of being practical. The real question is that the right trade-off to make?
And that leaves us with a huge, fascinating question to chew on. In this imperfect quest to put a price on health, what do we actually value more? A perfect answer that we can almost never get, or a practical, if maybe flawed answer that helps us make decisions right now when people's lives are hanging in the balance?